Welcome to another edition of The Balanced Perspective. As usual, I'm your host, Mansoor Ranaka of Negative Investments, and I have the absolute pleasure of having Iain Power, the CIO of Truffle Asset Management, joining me this morning in studio. Good morning, and thanks so much for joining us, Iain.
Thanks, Mansoor, and good morning to everyone who's joining us on the call.
Today's topic, the rise of the Global South. The Global South, a term generally referring to the regions of Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Oceania, and encompassing a host of developing nations, has in recent times come sharply back into focus as geopolitical rivalry has stepped up. Iain, from what seems to be an ongoing realignment of the global order, and which has recently picked up momentum, just looking at the number of countries wanting to join the BRICS bloc, for instance, are we seeing a sustained structural shift in the geopolitical landscape?
Mansoor, I think, as you correctly put it, I think the increasing geopolitical tensions and I guess rivalry between China and the US, and increasingly, I guess, the divisions that we're seeing are really resulting in some of the smaller emerging markets, and particularly in those countries that you've mentioned, looking for some sort of connection or some sort of allegiance. And I think if we sort of think about what's happening at the moment, where the US is effectively trying to, I guess, not really block China, but keep them out of certain areas of technology, and I guess certain areas out of the economy where they feel that, having China accelerating in that space would be a, serious threat to themselves. And I think that is giving rise to lots of space where lots of those other emerging markets, and particularly in the Southern Hemisphere, are looking for some sort of allegiance. And I think it talks to lack of US foreign policy supporting either Latin American or African countries or some of those other countries in a way in which perhaps, wouldn't have been as divisive. So I think it's, right now we're in an environment where walls are going up rather than where walls are coming down. And you are seeing lots of those, call it orphan countries, looking for some sort of allegiance to those bigger EMs like China and then like India. And I suppose that, really is a challenge for the US, but also a challenge for, the likes of the bigger emerging markets, China and India, because I think the ability to manage some sort of economic alliance or allegiance is actually quite tough. In the context of trying to pull together common policies and, more importantly, I guess, try and enforce them in a way in which, for example, the euro is done. So I think it really just is a symptom of the divisiveness of global politics right now. The fact that you've got more and more alliances in the West, particularly between Australia, perhaps even Japan, maybe South Korea in a way, all aligning to the West, and some of those perhaps orphan countries now looking for some sort of stronger big brother.
This, of course, plays into some of the economic phenomena that we're seeing playing out in markets. So with the shifting economic landscape, how do you see the competitive dynamics between the Global South and the established economic powers playing out?
Yeah, so I think, if we sort of take a step back, first of all, I think the last sort of 20 years we've seen the phenomenon of globalization, where many countries have outsourced their supply chains to those geographies where you've seen the ability to produce the widgets at the lowest cost, leveraging off, whatever the competitive advantages of those emerging market countries, and particularly China, has been. And I think given what we've seen over the last couple of years, there's almost a sharp reversal of those policies. And, notwithstanding the fact that I guess businesses around the world, or some of the big businesses, still have their supply chains dominated in China, we're starting to see that reverse. So, geographies like Indonesia, Vietnam, and perhaps even South Korea are becoming a lot more attractive in the context of the Western world looking to diversify their supply chains towards safer hands. And I think that's driving a lot of what we're seeing. But having said that, if you just listen to or read in The Economist this week, you'll sort of hear many Chinese firms, obviously, who are beneficiaries of these global supply chains, are repositioning their businesses out of China into some of those geographies to then try and capture, I guess some of those benefits. But there's absolutely no doubt that China, being a big beneficiary of a global trend over the last 20 years, now looks as though it's on the losing end of that equation, and many of those other countries in the East, I think, benefiting from this change in terms of policies.
As you mentioned, supply chains have undergone transformations, with many countries from the global south increasingly trading with each other rather than the traditional partners. How does the shift impact the lens through which you view investment opportunities?
Yeah, so I think what one's got to always do is try and get a sense of what's the impact of these big changes, and then look at what's priced in. So, one can obviously take a view that these changes continue to accelerate and become more entrenched as businesses bring supply chains back home. They make them more safe. And I guess, some of the things that it'll probably lead to is higher inventory holdings, perhaps higher costs, because you're no longer outsourcing for the lowest unit cost or the lowest widget cost. You're now outsourcing to places which are safe and where you can ensure that you've got supply of your various products coming into your business, and that these supply chains are in safe hands. So I suppose, these trends, if we sort of step back and look at them, are likely to continue. But obviously one needs to always make sure what is being priced into these various assets. So there are countries that are going to benefit, countries that are going to be on the back foot, but it doesn't mean to say that one or the other is necessarily good or bad, because the price you're paying for those opportunities can be very, very different.
Bringing it back to South Africa, given our own domestic challenges, can South Africa play a meaningful role in this new paradigm?
Interesting, combination of first and third world, highly developed financial services industry, sort of advanced regulatory bodies, combined with the massive wealth inequality, that we sort of all face every day. So an interesting emerging market, and I think, South Africa's history also lends itself to having quite a loud voice insofar as its representation on the various United Nations bodies, Security Council, and I think just generally South Africa has, certainly been seen as a stable voice over time, and I think lots of these bigger emerging markets, particularly the likes of a China, and of course what we've seen from Russia, would love to have that voice in their pocket. So I think, as you said at the outset, the gloves are off. The political landscape is fracturing, and I think everyone is sort of out there, I guess, to try and get as much support as possible. And, perhaps South Africa at the moment being rudderless to the extent we've got, probably little decisiveness in terms of leadership. We haven't implemented proper structural reform. The level of corruption that we got, I think, probably exposes us to being sucked in, almost as a puppet to some of those very, very strong voices. So I guess, certainly from a political landscape point of view, it would be a coup for those big countries to get us on their side. It wouldn't be good, I think, for SA to lose its independence. And obviously, in the same breath, I think one hopes that we've got strong enough structures, independent media, and of course an election coming up next year, perhaps to put the ship back onto the right course.
Iain, we'll wrap it up there, but a topic certainly that we should be keeping our eye on. I thank you so much for your time, and I thank you all for dialing in. Thank you so much. Till next time, goodbye.
Thanks, Mensur, and thanks to everyone for joining us.